Today, we're plunging into the fascinating and often misunderstood world of mining, focusing on something called Environmental and Social Impact Assessment, or ESHA. Now, if you're thinking paperwork, prepare to be surprised. Our sources for this deep dive, illuminating excerpts from Mining and the Environment by Dr. Karl-Heinz Spitz and John Trudinger, reveal how ESHA is far more than just a bureaucratic hurdle. It's designed to be a powerful shield, a tool for protection before exploitation.
Exactly. And what's truly compelling about Isha is its ambition to ingeniously balance the undeniable need for resource development with long-term environmental and social well-being. It's essentially a blueprint for foresight and careful planning, aiming to minimize harm while maximizing potential benefits for everyone involved.
That's the challenge, right? So what's our mission for you today? We're going to pull back the curtain on why ESHA is so critical, who actually shoulders the immense responsibilities, how it weaves through the entire life of a mine, and perhaps most surprisingly, how getting it right can literally save billions. We'll also clear up some big misconceptions. Ready to dig deep. So let's start at the beginning then. When we talk about ESHA, are we talking about one big study or something else entirely?
Yeah, that's a common initial thought, but no, it's much broader.
Yeah.
Think of environmental assessment as a comprehensive, ongoing planning, decision-making, and management process. It spans the entire life cycle of a mining project, from concept to closure. The EASY study you often hear about, that's just one crucial piece of that puzzle, typically conducted during the project's feasibility or detailed design stage.
Okay, so if you, our listener, are walking away with one core concept from this first segment, what should it be? What's the real goal of this whole endeavor?
The core aim, really, is to proactively foresee and address any potentially negative environmental and social impacts very early in the planning cycle. But just as important, it's about amplifying the positive opportunities that a project can create and ensuring those benefits are distributed fairly. It's about minimizing the negative and truly accentuating the positive impacts.
That sounds incredibly ambitious. Our sources tell us ESHA has been around for about half a century now. Has it actually lived up to that goal?
It has been effective, yes, but our sources highlight that its role can sometimes be more restricted than practitioners might like to admit. A significant challenge, often noted by the IFC Environmental and Social Performance Standards, that's the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank Group, whose standards carry a lot of weight.
For project funding.
Exactly. The challenge is the gap between the ESHA study itself and the actual real-world implementation of the agreed-upon mitigation measures during construction and operation. Without robust follow-through, an ESHA risks becoming merely a permitting exercise, just a box to tick for regulatory clearance or financing.
That really brings up a super important question. In this incredibly complex process, who's truly on the hook for what? Our source makes it clear that mining companies have these multi-layered responsibilities far beyond simply maximizing shareholder value.
That's spot on. While companies are indeed required to maximize shareholder value, they also have binding obligations to respect human rights and the rights of host communities. Plus, they have to fully conform to legal requirements, especially contractual agreements with host countries, and to obey all other applicable laws. Quite a list.
And where does community development fit into that complex web?
In many developing countries especially, contractual agreements often assign significant additional responsibilities for community development directly to the investor. This is an intentional effort to try and blend the often diverging interests of the company, local communities, and the government into one overarching goal: fostering sustainable social transformation.
Okay, let's flip the coin for a moment because this is often a source of confusion, right?
Yeah.
What isn't the mining company's responsibility? Where does their role end?
It's crucial to understand that mining companies are not and cannot act as governments. That's a key distinction. Their responsibility does not extend to stepping in for governments or assuming governmental duties for developing isolated, underdeveloped regions. While it's often practical for them to undertake certain actions, those efforts should ultimately be directed at assisting local governments in delivering essential infrastructure and services, rather than inadvertently creating kind of an unsustainable dependence on the company itself.
That makes sense. So if ESHA isn't a single study, it must be something that evolves with the project. How exactly does it weave through the entire mine life cycle, from that initial concept all the way to closure?
Ideally, environmental assessment should begin as early as humanly possible, right at the project concept stage. Seriously, the earlier the better. This allows for mitigation measures to be integrated directly into the initial mine planning rather than feeling like they're bolted on later. Early activities like site selection, environmental screening, and scoping out potential significant issues are best done then.
But are there ever situations where starting too early or just the way projects evolve can cause hiccups? Does that happen?
Absolutely. Our source notes that mine designs commonly undergo significant changes after the initial feasibility study and even ESIA approval. It happens all the time. For instance, in Case 2.1, the Batu Hijau copper and gold project in Indonesia, a really interesting example. Metallurgical studies conducted after their ESIA was approved showed that seawater could be used for froth flotation instead of fresh water.
Wow, that's a big change.
Huge improvement. It led to a completely new layout, eliminated the need for a large freshwater reservoir, which then required an addendum to the ESIA. It really highlights how ESIA isn't a static document. It's a living one that needs to evolve with the project. Though, frankly, many regulators are simply unaware of how frequently such practical improvements happen.
Okay, once we're at that feasibility stage, what are the key objectives of the ESIA study itself? What's it trying to achieve right then?
At that point, the ESIA aims to identify applicable environmental design criteria, or EDC, essentially the environmental rules of the road for the project. It also identifies sensitive valued environmental components, VEC, things like critical biodiversity, rare species habitats, or crucial water sources that are particularly important to protect. And it helps inform the mine design, anticipate potential negative impacts, and develop indicators for accurately measuring the impacts as they unfold later on.
And this process continues even once operations are up and running, right? It doesn't just stop.
Oh yes, absolutely. Environmental management and monitoring during operations must remain flexible and adaptive. It involves ongoing internal and external auditing, continuously rectifying any adverse impacts that emerge, and rigorously learning from the lessons along the way. Transparency and genuine respect for all interest groups, whether they're directly affected or not, are absolutely essential for long-term success here.
And what about after the last product is shipped and the mine is closed? Does ES still have a role then?
It certainly does. Post-mining environmental management and monitoring can and often must continue for years, sometimes decades. The focus, particularly driven by international guidelines like the IFC Performance Standard 1, is on implementing the Environmental and Social Action Plan, or ESAP, throughout the mine's entire life. That includes agreed-upon mitigation measures, ongoing monitoring, capacity building within communities, and establishing a robust management system that lasts well beyond closure.
Okay, our sources indicate that managing an ESIA has become almost as technically daunting as actually building the mine itself. That sounds intense. So, who typically bears the primary responsibility for navigating this enormous undertaking?
While the detailed technical work is often outsourced to expert consultants, and there are many good ones out there, the primary responsibility for managing the entire ESIA process, preparing all supporting documentation, and critically, implementing its recommendations, always rests with the mining company. Even in places like the U.S., where a government agency might technically lead an environmental impact statement, it's still fundamentally based on the proponent's information. The company is driving it.
So, for a mining company to effectively manage this monster, as you put it, what kind of leadership and skills are paramount? What do they need internally?
A highly skilled project manager within the company is absolutely paramount, non-negotiable. They need a team of qualified professionals, exceptional people skills to navigate diverse stakeholders, and traditional management skills are sources, like Table 2.1, detailed tasks from formulating consultant selection criteria to managing time and cost and ensuring rigorous review and quality control. Crucially, they need the foresight to identify potential issues early. They must set realistic schedules, but also maintain flexibility, because delays are surprisingly common due to factors often beyond their direct control.
And what about those consultants who perform much of the intricate technical analysis? Our sources reveal some pretty strong feelings from companies about what's the scoop there.
Yeah, you definitely hear a lot of frustration sometimes. Companies tell us they want senior-level advice, strategic thinking, not junior staff bogged down in measuring small turtles, as one source put it. They expect to be educated on potential pitfalls. They expect solutions. They see the consultants as the experts, not just like an extension of their own QA/QC team.
Yeah. So what does a mining company really value in their ESIA consultants then? What makes a good one stand out?
They're looking for a strategist, definitely. A trusted advisor on complex legal and process issues, and frankly, an advocate for the project within the regulatory framework. They expect full access to the consulting organization's complete expertise and their undivided attention. The consultant's project manager needs to command respect and, importantly, be able to deliver difficult news to the client when necessary. Can't sugarcoat things. And what really annoys clients, you ask? Embarrassment, almost always rooted in poor communication. This includes things like unannounced cost overruns, failing to identify and communicate bad news early, and submitting draft reports riddled with errors. A company shouldn't have to QA/QC its own environmental documents. That's the consultant's job. Clients also express frustration with a lack of focus or consultants endlessly waffling on minor, non-critical issues when there are bigger fish to fry.
That's fascinating because it highlights this natural tension, doesn't it? Companies often feel that adverse impacts are being overstated in the ESG.
That tension is indeed natural. It happens all the time. But the EHR practitioner's core responsibility is objectivity to report things exactly as they are, based on the science and the data. This beneficial exchange, this push and pull, actually raises environmental awareness within the company itself and challenges the consultant to continuously improve their assessment methods. And it's inevitable that other stakeholders will disagree too. An experienced EGF practitioner often feels they've achieved the right balance when they're criticized simultaneously by the project proponent for overstating impacts and by NGOs for understating them. You're somewhere in the middle then.
Right. Everyone's a little unhappy. Maybe you got it right. Okay, so while ESHA is applied differently around the globe, our sources highlight some common themes and core principles that guide its effective implementation. What's the foundational principle we really need to remember?
The first and most crucial point, I think, is that environmental assessment is a process, not merely a study or a static document you file away. It starts with that initial scoping phase and extends all the way through post-operative monitoring, sometimes for decades after closure. The ESIS study is simply the planning tool that's documented in the environmental impact statement. It's part of something bigger.
And when should this dynamic process actually begin? You mentioned earlier, but...
You want to commence early, as early as possible. Identifying major environmental and social issues at the earliest stage, what's called environmental scoping, is absolutely critical. Discovering major constraints late in the game can lead to significant, very costly delays. Some unusual projects even undertake what's called a fatal flaw evaluation very early on.
A fatal flaw evaluation.
Yeah, to identify absolute showstoppers, issues so profound they could entirely preclude development. For instance, a community of artisanal miners already occupying a specific ore body might be a fatal flaw for a large international company with certain standards, but perhaps not for a smaller, more entrepreneurial one that might approach it differently.
Okay, that makes sense. This sounds like it also requires very clear boundaries for the study itself.
Precisely. The EI needs to focus on a definable geographic area and time period. You can't study everything everywhere forever. While physical changes define the direct project boundary or footprint, impacts invariably extend much further. You have the ecological boundary, which includes indirect impacts like changes to water flows impacting downstream ecosystems, and the socioeconomic boundary, which encompasses all potentially affected communities. For the EI to be truly effective, the study area must include both the source of impacts and all areas of concern, at minimum coinciding with that wider socioeconomic boundary.
How do you even begin to measure a project's impact if environments are constantly changing naturally anyway? That sounds tricky.
It is tricky. That's where the no-action scenario comes in. You evaluate the no-action scenario for comparison. This means meticulously understanding what would likely happen to the environment without the project. Environments are inherently dynamic. Things change. So the ESI must identify and evaluate project-induced change relative to that dynamic no-action baseline. And since predictions can sometimes be wrong, comprehensive monitoring programs are always established. These should even include control sites outside the mine's direct influence, allowing you to measure natural changes separately from project impacts.
What about the risk of just getting completely swamped by information? These studies sound massive.
They can be. And that's why an issue should always focus on the main issues, both negative and positive. It's easy to fall into the trap of trying to cover too many topics in excessive, excruciating detail. It's absolutely crucial to assess both positive and negative impacts to determine the overall net effects of the project. Reports should be concise, always include non-technical summaries for decision makers, and most importantly, the mitigation measures proposed must be practical, workable solutions, not just theoretical ideas.
So, can Anisha actually improve a project's design beyond just assessing what's already planned?
Oh, absolutely. It can and should be used to proactively improve project design. That's one of its key functions when done right. When started early, it can directly inform conceptual design choices, such as the best location for critical mine infrastructure like tailings facilities, minimizing impact from the get-go. It's an iterative process, constantly back and forth with mine planning. Our sources mention encouraging environmental workshops at key planning intervals for collaborative brainstorming. Case 2.2, Mitsubishi's Gresik copper smelter, offers a great example. The EJA team successfully proposed a closed water cycle for slag granulation, completely eliminating potential contamination of the Madura Strait, a significant environmental improvement over the original design, driven by the EAK process.
And those mitigation measures themselves, what's the ultimate goal there? What kind of things are we talking about?
The main outcome of the Udaya process is really a set of clear options for mitigation measures. These are the concrete actions. They can range from advanced pollution control technologies, innovative waste reduction, and water recycling schemes to direct compensation for affected people, thoughtful community development initiatives, or even initial limitations on the mine's proposed size or throughput. It's a whole toolbox.
How does all this complex work tie back to that bigger idea of sustainable development? How does it connect?
ISIA fundamentally aims to integrate economic, environmental, and social objectives to ensure that mining projects align with broader sustainable development goals. That means striving for a stable local economy, maintaining a healthy environment, and improving the quality of life for communities. It demands a truly holistic approach. For instance, Case 2.3 highlights how calculating greenhouse gas emissions, which was once unheard of for mining projects, is now becoming standard practice. This pushes companies to internalize externalities, basically, taking responsibility for environmental costs that society might otherwise bear. Another crucial principle is to increase the overall capital stock in the region. This means going beyond just extracting minerals and actively maximizing productive human, social, and environmental benefits through what's termed social investment to offset any negative impacts. Ideally, the increase in renewable capital like skills, infrastructure, improved health balances, or even outweighs the loss of the non-renewable mineral resources over the mine's life. It's about leaving the place better off overall.
That brings up a critical and often very thorny point: equitable distribution of those benefits.
Precisely. Social tension is almost unavoidable if local resources decline, while capital stock in regions beyond the immediate mining area increases. Think of tax income going directly to the central government or shareholder wealth accumulating overseas. While mining companies are often blamed for this imbalance, much of the responsibility for equitable distribution actually rests with the host government and how they manage revenues. This also unfortunately highlights how anti-mining advocates can sometimes successfully exploit nationalist sentiments by focusing solely on what's perceived as being lost locally without acknowledging the broader picture or the government's role.
And finally, what role does working with people, with the communities, play in all this?
Crucially, ISIA requires working collaboratively with all stakeholders. Building broad local consensus and maintaining trust through the entire process is absolutely paramount. Communication must be frank and accurate, always presenting a balanced picture, never just a slick public relations exercise. If a community lacks awareness of modern mining practices, some companies even arrange visits to similar existing operations so people can see for themselves. However, it's also important, as our sources point out, to be aware of what they call false stakeholders, perhaps radical anti-mining activists whose goal is simply to block projects regardless of any potential benefits or mitigation measures offered. Distinguishing genuine concerns from obstructionism is key.
Okay, so we've talked about the overarching principles that guide this work. Now let's quickly walk through the typical step-by-step journey involved in a comprehensive ISIA. Where does it all begin, legally speaking? What's step one?
It really starts by thoroughly understanding the legislative and regulatory framework. You have to know the rules of the game. This includes the host country's specific laws, good international industry practice and GIP, like those ISC performance standards we mentioned, especially if international lenders are involved, and even the company's own internal corporate policies. These often get captured in what are called Environmental Design Criteria, or EDC, the specific standards the project must meet.
Then comes narrowing down the focus, getting specific.
Exactly. That's scoping. This is where you define exactly what issues and impacts the study should focus on, specify the relevant regulatory criteria, identify the methods to be used, and crucially, identify all key stakeholders and define the exact study boundaries: geographical, temporal, ecological, social. It's an early, vital opportunity to consider project alternatives and engage those key stakeholders right from the outset before major decisions are locked in.
Who actually reviews the technical mine design during this process? Is there engineering expertise on the ISIA team?
It might seem odd, but the ISIA team often surprisingly lacks a dedicated mining specialist, which our sources point out is a critical oversight. You need someone who truly understands the mining process, The project design review involves meticulously understanding all mine inputs and outputs like materials, water, energy in, products, waste, emissions out, and characterizing every single emission stream, from air and water to solid waste and noise.
Okay, this next step sounds like what the source calls the heart of the ESA. What's that about?
It is indeed the assessment of project alternatives. This is fundamental. While the mine's location might be fixed by geology, there are almost always alternative methods for mining, different ways of processing the ore, varying production rates, multiple options for infrastructure layouts like roads, power lines, waste facilities, and of course the critical no-action alternative, meaning what if the project simply doesn't happen at all? And these alternatives must be real, viable options, not just straw man solutions designed cynically to make the company's preferred proposal look better by comparison. Case 2.4, concerning exporting oil from Sakhalin Island, illustrates this perfectly. The Russian government basically pushed Exxon to show all feasible transport options, not just the one Exxon initially preferred.
And how important is it to bring the public into this conversation? How does participation fit in?
Embracing participation is absolutely vital. It's not optional anymore, especially under international standards. Standards like the IFC Performance Standards and the Equator Principles are very firm on the need for open, transparent, and voluntary public disclosure and participation, starting from the earliest phase. This includes genuinely understanding the expectations and concerns of affected people and actively addressing gender perspectives within the community, which can often be overlooked.
Okay, so before you can even begin to identify potential impacts, you need to understand what's already there, right? The starting point.
Exactly. You have to establish the environmental and social baseline. What does the area look like before the project? This is the comprehensive collection of background information on the physical conditions: climate, geology, water, ecological conditions, plants, animals, habitats, demographic, sociocultural, and economic conditions of the host region before the project begins. And you need to address both the environment of the potential mine site itself and the environment of the surrounding host communities. It's a two-pronged effort.
And then you get to the impacts themselves.
Right. Next, you identify potential impacts. These are the likely changes that the project could bring to host communities, local fauna and flora, covering all those economic, social, and environmental aspects we talked about. A common mistake here is focusing only on the negative effects, or maybe prioritizing physical or chemical changes over equally important social and economic ones, like impacts on livelihoods or community cohesion. And these effects can be very local, right at the mine site, or they can be far-reaching, affecting downstream water users, or even truly global, like contributing to greenhouse gas emissions.
So once you have this list of potential impacts, how do you determine which ones really matter most? How do you prioritize?
You quantify significant impacts, both the positive ones and the negative ones. This is where you assess the magnitude, duration, and likelihood of the most important potential changes. This crucial step involves getting detailed stakeholder views, what do they see as significant, and simplifying the complex analysis by systematically breaking down the project into its component activities and the environment into its various components: air, water, soil, people, etc. The ultimate quality of the ESIA often hinges on the skill of the team leader in integrating all these diverse specialist efforts into a coherent whole.
And finally, once all that analysis is done, what's the tangible output? What's the plan for action?
The final step here, the culmination, is to develop an environmental and social action plan, ESAP. This is the roadmap. This plan meticulously outlines the specific measures the company commits to undertake to avoid or minimize damage and to optimize the project's contribution to sustainable development. It identifies clear responsibilities, who does what, when, allocates necessary funding, and includes a robust monitoring framework to evaluate the success of mitigation measures and adapt the plan as new information emerges or circumstances change. And crucially, this monitoring should ideally extend to those control sites we mentioned, and it needs to continue long after mine closure, sometimes for many years.
Wow. The sheer volume of documentation involved in all that seems like a massive undertaking in itself. For our listener, why is this paper trail, this documentation, so incredibly crucial?
Yeah, the paperwork can be daunting, but it serves multiple absolutely vital purposes. Firstly, it's a non-negotiable instrument for mine approval. It's literally the key document regulators review, a prerequisite in nearly all jurisdictions. Secondly, once approved, it effectively becomes a legal document. That means all stated management and monitoring measures become binding compliance requirements. The company has to do what it said it would do. And thirdly, it's a critical reference point for all future reviews and audits. If unforeseen impacts emerge down the line or controversies arise, you can bet lawyers and anti-mining activists will dissect these documents word by word, so precision and clarity are paramount.
How complex do these documents actually get? Are we talking pamphlets or phone books?
Definitely closer to phone books. They can stretch to thousands of pages easily, thick binders full. While formats are often prescribed by host countries, there's this constant tension between the ideal of being brief but thorough and the tendency for these documents to become encyclopedic, covering every conceivable detail. U.S. regulations, for example, once aimed for a succinct 150-300 pages, but that limit is very rarely met in practice for major projects. Companies sometimes even end up beefing up reports, paradoxically, hoping that their sheer volume will somehow deter opponents or scrutiny.
What about the challenge of language? Our source highlights what they call the agony of this. That sounds painful.
It can be. Case 2.5, titled The Agony of Preparing ESIA Documents in Two Languages, provides vivid, almost painful examples of poor, sometimes nonsensical, translations from Indonesian to English. And it's a mistake to think this is just a matter of literal translation. It underscores the fundamental challenge of writing in simple, clear, unambiguous language in the first place, especially with multiple technical experts contributing sections. And then add the absolute necessity of communicating effectively with international stakeholders, lenders, and regulators who might only read the English version. This issue can also sadly reflect a lack of local technical writing expertise in some developing countries.
So once these extensive documents are finally prepared and submitted, how does the final approval process typically unfold? What happens next?
Obtaining ESIA approval typically involves a rigorous review process. This is often conducted by a dedicated environmental agency, sometimes an interdepartmental government committee, or occasionally a specialized review panel of independent experts. These panels generally encourage open discussion and significant public involvement, which is good practice. They allow companies to present their project and, importantly, to hear public views and concerns directly. While projects are actually rarely formally rejected outright if the ESIA process has been diligently followed according to regulations, the review panel certainly can, and often does, recommend significant revisions or additional conditions before granting approval. Oh, and one very common misperception, by the way, is that ESIA approval is the only environmental permit needed to build and run a mine.
Ah,
Not even close.
yeah.
In reality, operating a large mine can require literally hundreds of separate permits, licenses, and approvals at both local, regional, and central government levels. It's a vast web of ongoing compliance.
Okay, now this next point is absolutely vital for anyone involved in or observing large-scale projects. Delays are shockingly common in ESIA approval, and what might seem like minor holdups can carry truly staggering costs.
You're absolutely right to highlight that. The delays are a huge issue. They can stem from a variety of sources. Organized anti-mining activists using legal challenges, internal government disagreements, or turf wars between agencies, simply overwhelmed civil servants struggling with workload, or even, unfortunately, instances of corruption demanding facilitation payments. And the financial consequences of these delays can be truly staggering. We're not talking small change.
We're talking about real money, right?
Yeah.
Significant impacts.
Precisely. A seminal study often cited by Jorgensen and others back in 1996 indicated that project delays are the primary financial concern for companies awaiting project approvals, far outweighing the direct costs of the studies themselves. While there are direct out-of-pocket expenses during a delay maintaining staff, consultant fees far more significant are the opportunity costs. The deferred or outright canceled production revenue, the foregone earnings, disruption to potential customers, lost market opportunities if commodity prices change, and of course the accumulating interest on borrowed capital just sitting idle.
Can you give us a concrete example of just how impactful these delays can be financially? Put some numbers on it.
Yes, that same study estimated that the cost of delay could range from an astonishing US $38 million up to US $110 million for a moderately sized US $240 million project if delays stretch between just 6 and 18 months.
Wow, that's a huge percentage of the project cost itself.
Exactly. The biggest financial impact is often felt earliest in the project timeline, when capital intensity is highest. And it's not just the company that suffers. There's also the significant cost to the host country itself. The study estimated foregone income to potential employees, local contractors, and suppliers could amount to over US $100 million for just 1 year of delay, not to mention the lost royalties, taxes, and potential dividends for the government. Case 2.6 in our source, tragically titled getting trapped in the red tape, illustrates this perfectly with a real-world example of a mine development delayed for years due to a bureaucratic challenge from the Ministry of Forestry after official environmental approval had already been granted. Years wasted, millions lost.
So the message is crystal clear then. Any time apparently saved by cutting corners or rushing the ECA process early on can cost exponentially more down the road if it leads to challenges and delays.
Precisely. If approval timelines become too uncertain or unreasonably long due to inefficient processes or political interference, mining companies, which have global investment options, may simply decide to take their capital and invest elsewhere in a more predictable jurisdiction. The country loses out entirely.
Okay, to bring this really insightful deep dive to a close, let's tackle some pervasive misconceptions. Based on everything we've discussed, what is environmental assessment definitively not? Let's bust some myths.
Good idea. Firstly, it's not just a permitting effort or a simple box-ticking exercise to satisfy regulators. Viewing it that way completely misses the massive opportunity to elevate environmental and social management to the same strategic importance as core technical mine management. Secondly, related to that, it's not an afterthought. Its profound importance for successful future mine operation is often poorly understood, especially by technical teams focused on geology or engineering, which unfortunately leads to critical delays in its initiation. It needs to be there from the start. Thirdly, it's not purely a scientific or academic exercise. While it certainly involves deep technical expertise, it absolutely demands practical, real-world experience in mining contexts. Appointing local universities, for instance, while sometimes done to accommodate nationalistic pressures, can lead to generic boilerplate reports and a lack of practical implementation insight if not carefully balanced with seasoned international or industry expertise. Fourthly, it's not concerned with just a single resource like water quality or air pollution. It is by its very nature a multidisciplinary undertaking covering a wide spectrum of environmental, social, cultural, and economic issues. Often, the initial focus is too narrow on physical, chemical, or biological aspects, with complex social impacts receiving only superficial attention. That's a common failing. Fifthly, it's not a top-down management exercise, even though the company manages it. The critical social dimension of ESIA demands a genuinely participatory, bottom-up approach, where affected people and local stakeholders truly develop ownership in identifying potential impacts and collaboratively developing workable management and mitigation plans. They have to be part of the solution. Sixth, it's not a one-off exercise that ends when the report is submitted. Mine operations and environmental and social management are inherently dynamic processes. Findings need to be continuously revisited, monitoring data needs to be acted upon, and efforts must be adjusted as new information emerges or circumstances change, particularly in the social sphere, where community dynamics and expectations are highly fluid. Seventh, it's definitely not an environmental public relations or media strategy. While transparency and open communication are absolutely key, the fundamental point is to genuinely inform and involve the public in the decision-making process, not to manipulate opinion, spin the facts, or gild the lily simply for corporate image building. Authenticity matters. And finally, maybe most importantly, it's not just a study, but a fundamental way of doing business. For truly responsible mining companies, proactive environmental and social assessment and management is deeply embedded in their corporate culture. It's part of their DNA. This is reflected in projects that receive widespread public acknowledgement for their genuine contribution to local and national welfare. And while ESIA is incredibly powerful when done right, it's also not a panacea. It won't solve every problem. It's one crucial tool and process among many comprehensive approaches that a responsible modern mining operation will adopt to manage its impacts and maximize its benefits.
Wow, that truly was a deep dive into environmental and social impact assessments in mining. Thank you. From their core purpose of protecting before exploiting to that intricate dance of responsibilities, the step-by-step process, and those surprisingly high costs of delay. It's abundantly clear this is anything but a simple bureaucratic step. This isn't just about avoiding disasters. It seems it's about actively shaping a better, more sustainable project right from the very beginning.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really underscores that responsible resource development in a rapidly evolving world isn't just about digging minerals out of the ground. It's fundamentally about designing and operating a project that thoughtfully considers and actively contributes to the long-term well-being of both the environment and the host communities, ideally for generations to come.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener, the curious mind? It means when you hear about a new mining project, whether it's in your backyard or across the world, You now have a much deeper understanding of the intricate, multifaceted process happening behind the scenes, or at least supposed to be happening, aimed at ensuring it truly aligns with sustainable development principles. It's a powerful testament, I think, to the fact that knowledge is power. And knowing these details helps you discern the true value and perhaps critically evaluate the potential pitfalls of such monumental endeavors.
And maybe this leaves us with an important question to ponder. In a world that's constantly demanding more resources for green energy, for technology, for everything, how can we ensure that these vital principles of early assessment, truly collaborative engagement, and dynamic adaptive management actually become the universal standard for all resource development, rather than just an aspiration or something only the best companies do?
A truly powerful thought to chew on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep digging for knowledge.